Hey guys, how's it going? I'm the Duke of Italy, your favorite lo-fi music YouTuber, and today covering something I've been meaning to cover for honestly like years now. I've been planning on this thing for a long time, and I just decided to pull the trigger for this year. Today we are covering the collaborative discography of Boris and Merzbow, and you might be asking, "Oh Duke, why don't you just cover Boris or Merzbow's discography, and then this will show up?" Well, if I can have the effort to show you the screenshots of the Rate Your Music pages, you'll quickly see why. And even this video, you'd think, how many albums can they do together to not officially be called just another band? Quite a few. You can do quite a few albums with another act and just be Boris with Merzbow. You'd think it's almost like another guy in the band at this point. You'd think Masami Akita is almost like an honorary member of Merzbow. They've definitely collabed more than any other band. In fact, due to the sheer consistency of Boris's lineup, Merzbow has been with the band longer than the original drummer of the band, I believe, or vocalist. As you guys might know, Boris is a power trio, and they are a drone metal, shoegaze, sludge metal, noise rock, Japanese hardcore punk, and none of that stuff necessarily fitting together in a way that is knowable to people. I guess the closest example I could say is something mixed between the Melvins and like Man is the Bastard, mixed with something a bit more on the hardcore side. So like truly a really hard to define discography. And Merzbow is a harsh noise. I say a harsh noise. He is the harsh noise artist of a lifetime. The dude has had over 200 albums at this point. I'm probably totally undershooting that. Many of which are probably not worth looking for too hard, but at the same time, he's also made plenty of great harsh noise records coming from a person who's not a super big drone avant-garde noise fan. I liked a couple of his albums from a few years ago. I've always sort of enjoyed bits and pieces of his here and there. I think what he does collaboratively is excellent. And Boris as a band has been prolific from the beginning. You know, their first real release, Absolute Ego, was a single song over 45 minutes long, which predates Dope Smoker. And Boris has an interesting history as well. You know, they started as sort of a Japanese sludge hardcore band with some very drone metal elements, with of course that fourth member, and then they turned into a drone metal band for a couple albums. And you kind of figured they'd kind of be like that for a while, but no, they did a hard pivot pretty quickly. And even though they had a really low fidelity style, their writing was simply unparalleled. You had albums like Flood or Feedbacker or Akuma no Uda, just really great things. And the band was prolific right out the gate, of course, with Absolute Ego, but then as early as 2002, they're collaborating with Merzbow. Now, Merzbow's been active since the 80s, believe it or not. Dude's been prolific for forever, originally with like weird harsh noise machines that he'd record to tape. Really interesting stuff going on with his early career there. Not that I've dived into it, but that's it historically. And what's really cool is that 2002, Merzbow himself was in his laptop era, and Boris was still in their low fidelity, crazy noise, drone stuff era. At this point, Akuma no Uda hadn't come out yet. I believe one of the Heavy Rocks albums was out, but not both of them. So their actual rock tendencies were totally unrealized, but they were kind of eking out here and there. Just not the most prominent thing about them. They were known as an avant-garde act, but one thing they were definitely known as was heavy. If you've ever listened to Absolute Ego, it's like one riff for like 45 minutes with very little stuff going on in between, somehow maintaining drums the whole time and vocals as well is a real challenge. You know, bands like Sun, you know, if you listen to an album like White 2, they really have to like pull back on the elements, but here Boris goes and just is full steam ahead the whole time. Or they're known for single track albums like Flood, which is just an amazing sort of like wishy-washy post-rock masterpiece that begins with like bizarre tape loops. It makes Godspeed You Black Emperor look really easy. And I guess I'll stop dilly-dallying and talk about 2002, when both these artists get together for the first recorded time in history that gets released with an album called Megatone. Now, Megatone is very underrated because Boris, their main thing is the album Pink. Everyone loves the album Pink. If you want more stuff like Pink, listen to something like Akuma no Uda, Heavy Rocks, the original Heavy Rocks. I would recommend the last Heavy Rocks album, or even No. All really solid albums. I love Akuma no Uda myself. But the main appeal about me for Boris is when they get really abstract and weird, or better yet, when they mix it together. It's probably why Akuma no Uda might be my favorite, because it mixes like drone metal with the hardcore punk stuff. It's just a beast mode album. But Megaton, you do not get that at all. This feels like even more abstract and avant-garde than the stuff that you'd see shelled out by people in their basements that just dump it onto Bandcamp, and it's going to end up with like 10 listeners. Like truly people who have like bizarre outsider influences. But Boris was doing it right from the get-go with this crazy Merzbow laptop era, which worked in this weird industrial mechanical sense that almost had like the same vibe as like a lot of the more doomer British music of like the mid to late 90s, the underground stuff, like some of the more slower trip hop stuff. Some of the slowcore stuff out of America honestly matches it. Some of the drone metal from America, as well as something like Burial from England. That sort of dark nocturnal aesthetic is fully exemplified by something by Megaton. Despite having some of the most undetectable instrumental palettes ever, Boris is known for being masters of their craft at manipulating instruments to be something crazy. And the thing is, you could argue they don't even need Merzbow on a record like this. They already are doing feedback and crazy stuff with their own instruments. This is an album of just 3 songs, and it reaches at about an hour long. The first song is the most quiet one of them all. It is a very light and relaxing 20-minute long track of a single guitar note the whole time with this slightly modulating noise bit. I feel like it's just Wada and Merzbow here, but at the same time, it is, for lack of a better term, just a vibe. It is seriously just an amazing ambient piece of this very soft, fluctuating Merzbow bit, which Merzbow is known for having balls to the wall extremity, where Harsh Noise act like Prurient is known for having like a looming, droning synth the whole time that keeps you tied down, keeps you emotional. But Merzbow has no such niceties. His Harsh Noise is uncompromising. I mean, at least uncompromising in the way that isn't something like Harsh Noise Wall. It's uncompromising where it keeps you on your toes in how shocking and loud and scraping the walls off it can be. But here, Merzbow just peels it all the way back. And forgive me, I might be a little ignorant of Merzbow's earlier material. I know he had like Merzbeat and Merzbeat at one point. He's known to have occasionally done something softer, but this is one of those great occasions. It's one of those where he has a total sense of patience, even though he's known for having 20-minute tracks of just going balls to the wall, crazy harsh noise. Here instead, he's peeling it way back and just turning dials very slightly, very subtly, but it can definitely notice it, because with the lack of all this contrast, anything that changes is huge, and here it feels absolutely monumental. It is super soft, super nocturnal, a little bit on the depressing side, completely cold. Kind of reminds me of the Merzbow Prurient collaborative album they did a couple years back. And you reach the second track, which actually is much more like Boris proper, or at least Flood era Boris proper. You get this extremely slow guitar that doesn't sort of ground itself in that brutal, heavy drone metal sense. It's like drone rock in a way that isn't like Slowdive's Pygmalion. It's not like repeating the same riff forever. It's just like they have so much sustain that it's able to hold out this soaring, gliding, like glorious riff. Just a super melodic, amazing solo, like something like on Naki Kyoku off of Akuma no Uda, but instead it's just in the sky. It is like a glorious thing. So slow. It's moving extremely slow, but it is so beautiful. And over the top of the whole thing is a pretty sizable layer of noise as well, keeping you on your feet the whole time. It's an extremely inspiring and beautiful track. It keeps you locked in the entire time. And while there's no drums on this album, instead you get this sort of rhythmic tribal noise, which feels just awesome. Merzbow is really keeping this whole thing together. He's like the glue of these tracks, keeping it from being like a bizarre drone piece and turning it into this really gratifying musical experience that feels actually like an active listening experience. And for the last track, I would describe it as an evil version of the previous track. It's like got a more burning guitar sense. The harsh noise is way heavier. It's got this really dissonant, sort of crunching lead guitar that just never resolves for the entirety of its duration. It's unnerving and powerful, and the noise just crunches over everything. This whole album is a crazy experience. It's really cool the way it kind of redefines harsh noise as a genre, and it redefines post-rock as a genre. It takes both those, and it isn't just putting harsh noise over post-rock music. It's like both genres adapting actively towards the other. This album is phenomenal. It's great. I genuinely think it's one of the best collabs they've ever done. It's one of my favorite Boris albums. Really underrated stuff. I can totally understand why someone wouldn't like it, but to me it is completely inspiring in a way that not a lot of things do. It's great driving music. It's really hypnotic. It is so cool. It'll make you think a lot. I think it's a very gratifying experience, and not in the normal way Boris is, at least if you're a surface level Boris fan. If you like the more avant-garde stuff, then this is really going to be appealing to you. That is kind of me, even though I haven't spelunked the entirety of Boris's 48 studio-length album discography, including this one, but I am a huge fan of this album. Now, forget all that noise, because no pun intended there, by the way. We are on the next release they did together. It was a collaborative single, Walrus/Groon, and you might be wondering what could Walrus be from Boris. You know, there's a lot of weird titles, but you know, what could it be? It is a cover of I Am the Walrus by the Beatles. It's about twice as long, oddly less and oddly more psychedelic feeling. It's like, wow. So like the original I Am the Walrus is like watching like El Topo or like some Jodorowsky film. This is like watching Dude, Where's My Car? And I mean that in like the best way possible. It's like twice as long. I don't have actual praise for Dude, Where's My Car? It's just sort of a more like intense, active feeling, something that like takes less artistry to really think about. It's something that's a bit more in your face. It also like doubles the length of the song just by being slower and like doing a verse again. It even has Wada singing over the top of it, which I've actually never heard. This is still in the lo-fi era of Boris, so you don't expect anything like too like clean, too well blended, but like it's still really noisy and burning. It's like a stoner metal version of I Am the Walrus. It's a really fun track. And Groon is far noisier. It feels like a drum-focused improv jam that they sort of all collab on. If it's not improvised, then it's not the most well-constructed track I've ever heard in my life. But that being said, this single is it's fine. You know, it's totally something worth listening to if you want to be a completionist. I'm sure Boris has never been like aching to bring these tracks out again live, but it's totally a fun time. You know, you're not gonna be losing things or losing time if you listen to the cover of I Am the Walrus, because I mean it's a great song in the first place. It's kind of funny listening to it this time. I guess then the Dude, Where's My Car reference is a little bit more relevant. And up next is the first collaborative live album from 2001, recorded then and released a little bit later. And let me get this title right. 0409-2001, which I could be a date now that I think about it, which this was recorded actually September 4th, 2001, using the sort of like more European style of putting a date down, which I was a little excited there. I thought it was about to be 10 days before I was born, but I guess I was just born and alive already when they recorded this thing. But they took them until 2005 to release it. And what's really weird about it is it actually pulls a title from Megatone, which this album is very interesting as it's an even more low fidelity live recording of Boris playing a set all in a row with Merzbow on top of the whole thing. And it starts with a track off of the original Heavy Rocks album, and it is burning and it is intense. And then you hear Merzbow kick in right when the energy kicks up, and it is like burning down. The whole thing is just the noisiest, most chaotic mix. And you could tell it's not like the drums are distorted and peaking in the mics. It's not that the distortion is way too heavy in the guitar. It's none of that. It's that the harsh noise is on top. So even though things were probably already peaking or being too noisy, it's like now you have a literal layer of harsh noise on top and it's super fun. And it's about a 30-minute long recording, so it's not too much of an undertaking to go through, but it is a bit of a rush. It's one that you can't help but like laugh at the end of because it's just so crazy. Merzbow is just cranking things out, and I love the sort of Akuma no Uda approach here where it contrasts the drone metal with the crazy, fast, more hardcore songs that Boris is kind of known for. It's a blast. It's got burning, intense energy from beginning to end, and the B-side is almost more space rock, sort of jam band-esque, with songs reaching a little longer in length. It all feels a little bit nonsensical, almost like this release shouldn't have happened, but I'm glad it did. I think it's a good release. I don't get a ton of like deep artistic value out of this one. Not that Boris's rock music is unable to do that. It does that consistently for me. But in this case, I just kind of stare at it and I kind of wonder why things are the way that they are. Maybe my appreciation of this album is a little bit ironic, and that's why I don't think it's like a great album, but it's just so crazy. It's really cool too. I mean, not a lot of people are ballsy enough to be like, let me just throw harsh noise on top of my rock music. And here you go. And it's awesome. And just in case you thought the drone albums were done, the next thing we have is Sun-Baked Snow Cave, which is another Boris and Merzbow collaborative drone album. And I say album like it's not a song. It is a 62-minute long song filled with droning and noise and really slow post-rockisms that kind of evoke a sort of similar approach to that of Flood, I would say. It begins very minimalist and very light. I wonder if it's even live played in the studio. A ton of tape hiss over it as this acoustic guitar plays the exact same riff for 5 minutes straight until it jumps an octave, which it sounds super weird and like unnerving, but in a way that's like, it does lock you in like the very first part of Flood, which is kind of why the comparison is there. And then it starts adding a little bit more harmonic content, you know? The chords become a little bit more interesting as it goes along. The guitar doesn't really speed up all that much, but some more noise is threaded through, which with the chords becoming a bit more dissonant or discordant, it does get a bit more urgent. And after 17 minutes, we are treated to some seriously destructive bass guitar work. Sort of the more drone metal leanings start to seep through with the heaviness of the noise. It all starts building up in a very ambient and very swampy way. It's completely immersive. And everything changes as the bass sort of pulls back a little bit. It gives way to Merzbow's chilling electronics, which is totally his laptop era stuff. It had a very minimalist sort of electronic feel to the whole thing. And I mean like sparse little electricity coursing through. It was like very light but still kind of mystical. And then the guitar sustain was also a really cool element here. It keeps you locked in a way almost like the Prurient albums would be. And after the coarse feedback sort of slows down a little bit, you get the heaviest electronics that sift in and out. And all these various drones soar in with absolutely no identifiable origin. Every time you get comfortable with this song, there is a new texture that comes in to shatter everything. And the noise kind of pulls back just to turn super hypnotic. It keeps you locked around for another few minutes. This album really knows how to play with your sense of perception of time, or what could keep you focused. And similarly, you know, that light guitar from the beginning kind of returns in a more slowcore sense. It seems to have a bit more effects going on. It's not quite manic, I would say, but the ending guitar chords have this crazy, huge sense of emotion that pulls you in all sorts of different directions. And that's 62 minutes for you. It really, a lot of stuff happens in 62 minutes, but still like not a lot at the same time. You know, it's a lot for drone, but not a lot for 62 minutes. So it's the most action-packed drone album I could think of, but at the same time, it's also one of the best. It's another banger. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I love this one as well. Maybe not as much as Megaton, because that one is just so chilling and has such a specific atmosphere, but maybe in a re-listen, who knows how I'm feeling. It is maybe a slight bit hard to pick out elements at some point, just because the unidentifiable origins almost feel like something this album leans on as a crutch, but it's so easy to ignore. This album sounds so cool and it's so immersive that it's really hard to like paint that as anything of importance. This thing is phenomenal. It's so great. I really recommend it. It's one of the better drone albums out there. And up next is the next live album of Boris and Merzbow, known as Rock Dream. It's probably the one you came here for, and It's for a good reason. If you take Boris's most prolific era of its best albums, highest consistency, most interesting material, and you did an entire greatest hits live show and included Merzbow and did a crazy set list of just all the bangers, and if anything's missing, it'll show up on a later album, but like, well, I don't want to talk about those, but it's literally in this video, so I guess I will. This is what Rock Dream is. Rock Dream is something you need to have good speakers for, and I mean speakers. Don't listen to it on headphones. You know, it's still sort of low fidelity recording back then, but you got highlights off of Pink. You got highlights off of Heavy Rocks, Akuma no Uda. The whole thing opens with a shortened version of Feedbacker, which is a single song. It's about like a half hour long. You get a burning post-rock track that it just will bring everything together. It's insane. And what's really cool is this album sort of divides itself into two big sides. Even though it's already a double album, it's already huge. The first like disc, I guess you could say, is just the droniest, heaviest stuff. Merzbow's going crazy over the top, such as the song Evil Stack, which has Merzbow just cranking out the heaviest electronics you've ever heard, seriously sparse drumming. It has the most horrible vibe. It reminds me of like some amplifier worship stuff. And then the next side, you have sort of another divide between the A and the B side, or I guess it's the C and D side at this point. You know, the C side is more of the Boris sort of hardcore, like fast-paced rock stuff going on, and Merzbow is just cranking it out over the top of all of it, and it sounds amazing. You know, the energy is unparalleled. You're just surging forward the entire time, and then you reach the D side, where you kind of reach sort of the shoegazier stuff, which even though it starts more doom metal, it soon courses into a more lighter, spacey, sort of ambient vibe to the whole thing. I mean, the track The Evil One, which sobs, is just an ascension. It feels like everything coming down at the same time. It is a glorious, destructive track. And then like right at the track right next sounds more like Pink Floyd. You know, you get a more softer, beautiful angle right after that, and the noise becomes so much more subdued for the entire rest of the record until you reach the classic Pink track Farewell, where the noise is very subdued, yet it still has this sort of quiet, sort of ambient nature to the whole thing that just ties it all together. But what would it be without being super heavy at the same time? It is crushing but amazing. Just a phenomenal piece of music here, and a phenomenal album. Rock Dream is highly regarded for a reason, because it's just a live album. Like, take your favorite artist, their live album, their best live album. It's probably got just the best collection of songs on there. You know, maybe take like Swans Are Dead. Imagine if Swans Are Dead was featuring just, I don't know, Diamanda Galas. And here she is helping everything. Imagine if Diamanda Galas could help all those songs. That's what Rock Dream is, but for Boris. And there's nothing wrong with that at all, but also it passes with flying colors. Merzbow, I guess the only criticism at all you could give to this thing, if you had to look for one, and you really had to, is that sometimes Merzbow can be a tiny bit obtrusive and might not sound the most calculated on when he's applying his noise, but I don't think so at all. I think it feels very, very well constructed, and it's kind of hard to tell because it's harsh noise. You know, it's not a very musical aspect of music. It is stretching the definition of music, but the way it works is just so heavy and so emotional at the same time. You know, Merzbow, he's proven time and time again that like harsh noise can serve as music. It really can be emotional and hypnotic and very deeply gratifying, and this is one of the best examples of that, if he hasn't already proven it twice in this video so far. And up next is a studio recording, actually, known as Clatter, which was just added to Spotify, if you guys noticed. Boris, they were posting it on their Instagram, and people were hyped a little bit, but you don't need to be that hyped for it, because it's the least good Boris and Merzbow collab that they have, because it's released like 8 years after it was supposed to. It was kind of released around Akuma no Uda. It feels almost like a rough draft of the stuff for like Rock Dream. It's a lot of Akuma no Uda material. In fact, it shares the track list of Akuma no Uda minus a slight deviation. It opens with a song called Introduction, like Akuma no Uda, except it's not Akuma no Uda at all. It's a sound collage with some sparse guitar drumming over the top. Sounds honestly a little bit like some stuff off of like Sunbaked Snow Cave, but like just not as good. You know, the production is slightly updated, but it doesn't sound as good. It's it's a cool one. It's one of the better tracks on this album, this and the closer. And then you go straight into Akuma no Uda, which is like kind of crazy. Which, if you want an intro, here is Akuma no Uda's introduction. You know, you get that blistering hot, super intense drone metal riff, and it holds it for a long time, like it's supposed to. It's a cool version for sure, but it just feels a bit unnecessary. And what's even more unnecessary is the next song called Jane, which is like a psych rock guitar cover. And it's also not even a song called Jane. It's a band called Jane that they cover one of their songs. And it's got a wobbly, syncopated riff with Merzbow over the top of it. It's certainly interesting, but it feels very random for this album. And the next track is Clatter 1. And the following track, Clatter 1, is almost like if you took Jane and made an industrial, really heavy version of it with Merzbow screaming over the whole thing, which lacks a little bit of substance as far as Merzbow goes, but it is exhilarating. And the feedback leads us into the final track, which is a version of Naki Kyoku, which it's an even longer version of Naki Kyoku, which is already over 10 minutes long, but this one it's crazy. You know, it starts off with a huge amount of feedback, like Sprain, Lama's Effigy level of feedback and noise, just so much. And then it just starts going into the song, as you know, and Merzbow pulls back, but when it hits the transition into the crazy heavy guitar solo in the middle, Merzbow he takes no prisoners. You know, he just comes in with a vengeance. It's brutal. It's so heavy, it's like stupid. In all honesty, this version is a bit unnecessary, but the extended jam is super cool. I just wish it was blended a little bit better. It feels like a kind of like a rushed version. Like Merzbow here on this album in particular, more than any other collab they've done, feels like he kind of was brought in day of and was like, dude, do your thing. And I'm sure when they were done, they were like, you know, for an improvised session, very great. If this wasn't improvised, I don't know how the value of it would be. I much prefer, I mean, knowing it's improvised, it's kind of cool, but like as a re-listenable experience, it's not as cool. So you might be wondering why at this point in Boris's career they'd be making this album, because it was recorded in 2004. It's really unfortunate because Akuma no Uda is so amazing, like truly amazing album, like one of my favorite albums ever. And to hear it just be kind of whatevered here, surprisingly enough, even though it's like whatever, it's like these artists were so talented at the time they could almost pull it off, but they just don't quite. You know, it's okay. It's worth a listen, but I can already tell you're not going to want to listen to it again after that. You know, maybe you'll pull up that version of Akuma no Uda if you're trying to show your friend Boris, and it's just going to be so noisy, they're going to be shocked, and that is a point of appeal. But other than that, you know, there's not a ton going on here. And up next is Gensho, which Gensho is interesting because everything here is re-recorded or a cover. And it is divided into two sides, actually. There's sort of like a Boris side and a Merzbow side. The Merzbow side being longer, less tracks, just like crazy track lengths. And both are doing their most avant-garde material, sort of, kind of, not really, because while Merzbow is doing some of his most eclectic harsh noise work, some of his best work, Boris is doing a lot of their older songs and interpreting it in a drone metal sense. It is a disjointed album for sure. It's more of a split album than a collaborative album. Calling it Boris with Merzbow is cheating a little bit because you look at this concept and you get really excited, you know? You think it's going to be like an almost hour long Boris album with their best songs with Merzbow over the top of it. It's going to be rock dream, but with good production. And it's just not that. I mean, for Boris, this track list is crazy because it's all re-recorded, so it's all songs you know. But Merzbow has stuff that, I mean, if you knew it, you'd have to be the craziest Merzbow fan in the world. There's one guy in Rate Your Music who's reviewed all of his albums, and the only one who would really care that much is that guy. That being said, Merzbow's side is like awesome, but I'll talk about the Boris side more because it's literally like a greatest hits compilation. It literally opens with Farewell from Pink, one of the most lauded and appreciated Boris albums for sure. And you could tell right off the gate, you know, this is going to be like a very little drums experience, and it sounds great. You know, Pink was one of the first Boris albums to be of a better fidelity, and it shows. It sounds really awesome. And then it turns sour and disgusting when it turns into the song Huge from Amplifier Worship, which is like a total different era, but it's just so crushing and evil. You wonder how even these songs went into each other. There's feedback and a light layer of noise that is just crackling, climbing up the walls. It is crazy stuff. It kind of makes you think that Merzbow is on this side of the album, but he's not. It's just the dudes in Boris using their own noise generators, whether it's feedback from amps or their own weird instrument they've set up. It's kind of hard to tell because Boris knows how to do that stuff. Go ahead and find me an English article where they just give an in-depth explanation. If you actually can, I would really appreciate it. I'm ad hominem here, but I can't just find resources like that on the cuff. Which the next two songs are both sort of like collab tracks they did before. One is called Rainbow off the album Rainbow, and the other one is called Resonance, which comes from one of their earliest albums, which is one of their earliest forays into more rock style music. It's got a cool sort of like a smooth jazz drum approach. It's kind of fun. It's kind of interesting. But then it goes into probably the track you're all here for, Sometimes, which is a cover by My Bloody Valentine. Which, of course you know that song. My Bloody Valentine is the most applauded shoegaze act of all time, one of the best, and this is one of their most applauded songs, even on the album Loveless, which is widely considered the best shoegaze album of all time. I'm not here to argue about that, but it being here is certainly of note, and it sounds great. It's a version that is like twice as heavy, twice as slow. It is like syrup, the song. You just melt into the whole thing. And I have to say, Atsuo has an amazing vocal performance here. It is done very well. And like some people, especially American audiences, can criticize his vocal style as just something that's really not as accessible to Americans. It's not as bad. It's just that like we're not used to it singing like that. But the way he sings here, it's like, it's moany in the way that like I guess like kind of Deftones would do it. It works for like a global audience. It's a really good track. Just listen to it yourself. First time I ever heard it, I was long before I even listened to more than 2 Boris albums, and it sounded amazing. And it was really thick. I actually thought Merzbow was on it. And then later you get a version of Akuma no Uda off of the album Akuma no Uda, which is really just like introduction. I don't know. I guess because it's not the introduction of the album, but it is a 12-minute long version instead of 9 minutes, and it is just so thick and heavy. Which the next song, Akirame Flower, is like sort of a more interlude track, which is like almost like slacker rock-esque. It kind of calls to that earlier track I talked about, which it feels kind of weird until it transitions into Vomit Self, the ending of the side. It's a track off of Amplifier Worship. And it is a very clean transition into the most disgusting feeling you'll ever have. I swear, it's like listening to like Infester. There is so much noise throughout that it is insanely crushing. The Boris side of this whole experience here is a little too consistent, a little too weird for me. I feel like it's just slightly disjointed, but it's so awesome at the same time. It kind of evokes that first Boris Merzbow live album where it's just like, hey, screw it. Let's just do it, which the Merzbow side comes next, and it is very, very interesting. It's got probably Merzbow at his most dynamic. You go between the first song, which is incredibly rhythmic. Everything seems to be oscillating at one point or the other, and even though it's 20 minutes long, I'm not going to say it's like actively like enjoyable, like listening to progressive rock music if you're lame and listen to progressive rock music still, except for Yes or King Crimson or Tool, but the way it works is just so hypnotic. It keeps you locked in the whole time, and every element drifts in and out in this way that's just gliding like on ice. It's kind of beautiful in a sense. And then it gets even more minimalist as it goes through the track list. The third song on this side it got just the craziest, loudest lead harsh noise part that pulls back and forth whenever it feels like it. It's horribly punishing compared to the more drony elements of before. But while before it was like entirely consistent and kind of interesting like that, here you have and I'm repeating myself, I know, an early Swans-esque level of dynamics, although to me it feels even heavier than that. And the last track sort of evokes, I guess you could say, Merzbow at his most popular, like Pulse Demon style stuff, where it's just screaming, heavy feedback, tearing the walls down, got you drooling on the floor, got you making a mess of yourself. It's just classic Merzbow stuff, which I guess kind of raises sort of an interesting question about his career. Why is Pulse Demon his most popular album? There's no real reason for it to be his most popular album. He has heavier, he has longer, he has more bizarre stuff, but he also has easier bizarre stuff. I don't know why Pulse Demon is the one to be Merzbow, but it might be the album cover. All I know is that it's not my favorite Merzbow album, and neither is this my favorite Merzbow or Boris album, but I still hard-pressed to tell you it's not great. It's disjointed, for sure. The Boris side just kind of makes no sense. I mean, it makes plenty of sense. They were like, let's take our best slow songs and make a drone metal greatest hits, and then I guess maybe they thought that was too boring and added a couple interludes that just didn't make a ton of sense. And Merzbow is here just like, let me make some of my best material to date, and he does it. He actually does it. And we all wish they were both playing at the same time. I wish this was a Boris and Merzbow album as well as a Merzbow album. These two together don't make a ton of sense as a split album, but what do I know? Because Akitsa and Prurient have done a split album together, and so I don't know anything. So, it's great anyway, and you don't even have to listen to me, because I'm not going on giant tours internationally, but Boris is. But I don't think Merzbow is, and that needs to change. I don't know how I would do at a Merzbow live show. I don't know how I'd feel about that. If any of you have seen Merzbow live, I'd love to hear about that. All right, home stretch here. We have reached the final Boris and Merzbow collab so far. I'm also hoping that they do another one at some point, as they've been wildly entertaining. Like, if you can say that they're not great, then they're at least wildly entertaining. Clatter, sometimes I'm like, it's kind of sad. It's probably my least favorite Boris album of their entire career. A lot of people actually agree with me, but I haven't listened to every single Boris album, so I'm just uneducated and dumb and stupid. But here, we have their latest collab. It is of this decade, and yet it's all of 2019 material. It is called, and let me get this correct, because no English speaker in their right mind will get this correct, and I think people of Japanese will get this even less correct. 2RO12PO. That is the actual name of this album, and it is sort of like a comprehensive 2019 breakdown of Boris with Merzbow over the top. Now, in all honesty, I've listened to very little of the material that was pulled from Boris to make this album. All these songs here was the first time of me listening to them. It's all from their 2019 album, or the Tears EP, or a song called Absolute Ego, which is not their debut single / EP / album, the 40+ minute drone metal song. It's their 2012 single that they were like, I hate this word, they were really cheeky and decided to just make another song called Absolute Ego, as well as a song that is seemingly original called Journey. I couldn't prove to you if it is or isn't, and a cover of Boris by the Melvins. So if you think about it conceptually, it is like the least desired Boris and Merzbow collab, or at least desired Boris release. I couldn't imagine being like, hey, Boris, you're about to pop off with No. A lot of people are about to love it, and people are about to think you are entering the 2020s with a bang. What if you collab with Merzbow? And then they're already saying yes, of course, because I remember seeing this thing drop, and for some reason I didn't listen to it then, but I was like, I freaked out a little bit. I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Like, I just heard about Merzbow on some, I don't know, Brad Taste in Music video or something back then. Who even remembers what was going on then? It was COVID. But you see that and you're like, this looks amazing. And then Fantano did a Why You Don't Review, so who cares? You had to be there. You had to be 19 years old. But now I'm old and wise. Feeling old, at least. People say I'm not old, but they always think I look like I'm 27. I'm 23. but that's for another time. What really matters is that this album was released without the knowledge or consent of the world. You know, if you heard that Boris and Merzbow were going to get together and do a collab album with mostly songs from their latest album, you'd hope it would happen, I don't know, 6 months after No. But I tell you what, their material from a couple years ago being Heavy Rocks, Fade, and W, I was a big fan of. W was my least favorite of those three, but I still thought it was really, really cool. You know, Fantano had to give it like a 4 or something. That bald-headed freak. I say that like I don't desperately need to get this hairline fixed. But you look at this album here, and it feels so bizarre. Like you're like, how do you expect to make a lot of money off of this? Like Boris hadn't made their 2020s comeback yet. And like they're in a bit of a lull period. You know, they just did their Harsh Noise trio of albums. It's like, what are they really expecting to do here? But they basically take all these tracks and they do it here. And while I haven't heard the material this was all pulled from, and I still haven't, except for Boris by Melvins, which is a banger, I have to say it's all executed pretty interestingly. It's done pretty well. Like, there are some outliers here, like the version of To the Beach, which a lot of people seem to like, but I thought it sounded horrible. And like I know I have like a slight bias towards artists that I really like, but I listened to it and I was just like, this like sounds bad. Like I can't hear Boris like at all. Like the mix here is garbage. But then right after is the track Coma, which you feel like Boris and Merzbow complement each other perfectly here. It's I mean, maybe it's because it's the 2019 album material. It feels like they just blend together beautifully. And Absolute Ego, which I mentioned earlier, is sort of like a stoner rock sort of banger they got going on, and it's a nice breath of fresh air. It works really well in the track list. I mean, you can't hurt it any more than something like To the Beach was doing, so here it actually works really well, which is kind of an interesting thing. You know, if an album like sucks and you have a song break the tempo and it pulls away from the general atmosphere of the whole thing, is it really bad? Like, does it harm the album? Makes me think about Tickets to My Downfall by Machine Gun Kelly, how that last song of the album had just that crazy weird melodic lead that ended the whole thing, and it was actually kind of good. I guess I just outed myself as liking a single Machine Gun Kelly song, or a half of a Machine Gun Kelly song. Let's not be ridiculous. But you know, there's also highlights, like especially the final track, Shadow of Skull, which comes from that 2019 album I've been bringing up so many times and yet still not knowing it. It's just a drone metal track where the feedback is just pushed to its limit. You know, it's a really noisy track that feels like with such high fidelity, you think some level of compression would be there, but it doesn't sound like it. And good, you know? As much as I use compression myself in my own music, it's like sometimes you just don't need it. And here, they know they don't need it, and it sounds phenomenal. You know, I oddly enough, this album we're talking about today, which I don't want to repeat the title of, 2RO1 2PO, whatever it is, it's good. You know, it's good. I would be so lying if I said it was fantastic. I would also do the same if I said it was bad, because it's neither of those. It is unnecessary. It is unnecessary, and I don't care for its existence. And will I even really re-listen to it? Probably not, because I just have so much to listen to. But I had a good time listening to it, and you're not really wasting your time. Is it for completionists? I guess so. You know, there are thousands of great albums out there, and I really believe that. And this isn't one of them. But, like, it's not entertaining from a bad sense. You know, all of these albums today have been entertaining, except for Clatter. You know, Clatter is just kind of disappointing like that, but it's still good, or it's, like, passable. But that's the cool thing about Boris and Merzbow, you know? They're never going to make you something boring unless it's in a conceptual sense like Clatter, where it's just like you took my favorite Boris album and made it less appealing, I guess. But, you know, all these other releases are like improving, or at least doing it justice in some way, shape, or form, or just being a insane live album that is so noisy it's crazy, like that first live album. But I just gotta say, an exciting collaborative discography. You know, not a lot of people do that. Makes me wonder if Blade and Young Lean could get together and do a collaborative album that isn't Psychos, because we've been wanting that for 11 years, which makes me sad now that I think about it. But, you know, c'est la vie. that's all I gotta say about Blade and Young Lean. But Boris and Merzbow, I hope they have more for me to say about, as well as also Blade and Young Lean. I'm gonna keep reviewing that stuff. But I had a good time listening to this stuff. I hope you guys had a good time watching this video. I hope you guys enjoy the music as well. Those first two studio albums are amazing, and that second live album also amazing. That's the TLDR of it. And the TLDR of what I'd like you to do is check out all the links in my description, and a big, everyone stop the presses announcement I gotta make. Bridget made this thumbnail, not Jen this time. Jen's doing more thumbnails for me, but I let Bridget do this one because Bridget and I are going to see Boris in October. This is the third time I've had the opportunity to see Boris, except other than those 2 times, I'm actually following through with it, which I know you guys are going to lambast me in the comments like, Duke, you had the chance to see Boris twice? I know. Well, that second time I saw Death Grips. That first time was some BS, Death Grips is like the only reason to not see Boris. Let's be real with ourselves here. But so great. Such a good band. I'm so excited. Apparently they're doing the Amplifier Worship set, which should be super awesome. I'm going to see them in Atlanta in October. So that video will come as a review at some point that I hope won't be as long as this video. Geez, I'm looking at my recording time. But if you enjoyed this one, forget everything I said. Just follow Bridget's Instagram, please. But if you'd like, you could follow mine too, or you could follow my ex. That'd be cool. Or especially, actually, other than my own social medias, I'd love if you join my Discord server where we talk about music and mostly Blade and abusing alcohol. Yeah, but you know what? That's about it. Hope you guys are doing well out there, and have a good day. Bye.